Imagine a silent dawn in Washington, D.C. during the sweltering summer of 1972. A towering glass-walled building, known as Watergate, held secrets no one was ever supposed to uncover. Suddenly, a security guard notices something strange. A simple strip of tape holding down a door latch. It looks insignificant, but that tape would mark the beginning of a scandal powerful enough to bring down the President of the United States. What seemed like a common burglary revealed itself to be something far darker. Behind that door, men connected to the White House were conducting a clandestine operation to spy on political opponents. A detail so small, a forgotten piece of tape, ended up exposing a network of conspiracies, lies, and cover-ups that would shake the very foundations of the world's greatest democracy. And here's the true shock. All of this was happening while President Richard Nixon was campaigning for re-election. The White House, instead of standing as the ultimate symbol of law and transparency, was secretly hiding a scheme that looked like something ripped straight from a spy thriller. But this was only the first layer. What began as an almost trivial arrest would transform into one of the biggest political scandals in modern history. With each revelation, the noose tightened around Nixon, and an entire nation asked itself, how far could power truly corrupt? The most disturbing detail? The operation's biggest mistake wasn't the burglary itself. It was the desperate attempt to cover up the truth. And that attempt, piece by piece, would ultimately destroy a presidency. What no one could have predicted that night was that a strip of tape on a door would become the key to a mystery that still fascinates and haunts the world today. Richard Nixon. For many Americans in 1972, he represented stability in a world rattled by the Vietnam War and Cold War tensions. Re-elected in a landslide victory, he seemed untouchable. A firm leader, determined, a man projecting the image of total control. But behind the controlled smile and the steady voice in his speeches, there was a president tormented by one obsession, the fear of losing power. Nixon saw enemies everywhere, journalists, political rivals, even former allies. To him, every criticism was an existential threat. This contradiction between the image of a confident leader and the reality of a paranoid man would become the fuel that ignited the Watergate conspiracy. As Nixon celebrated his crushing victory at the polls in an unremarkable building in Washington, another story was beginning to unfold. The Democratic National Committee had its headquarters inside the Watergate complex, and it was there that Nixon's men decided to act. The contrast was brutal. On one side, parties, celebrations, triumphant speeches. On the other, darkened hallways, pried-open doors, and wires hidden inside telephones. Two very different worlds colliding in secret, about to explode in public. It was the early hours of June 17, 1972. Security guard Frank Wills was making his nightly rounds at the Watergate complex. He wasn't a cop, not an investigator, just an ordinary watchman. But that night, his eyes landed on something out of place, a strip of tape pressed over a door lock. To anyone else, it would have seemed trivial, an irrelevant detail. But Wills grew suspicious. He removed the tape, continued his patrol, and minutes later returned to check again. And there it was, another strip of tape. Without realizing it, Frank Wills had stumbled onto a secret that could have remained hidden forever. By calling the police, he set off a chain reaction that would expose a web of espionage, sabotage, and corruption leading straight back to the White House. Police arrived discreetly, expecting perhaps ordinary burglars looking for cash or documents. But what they caught was something far more sophisticated. 5 well-dressed men carrying spy equipment. Bugs, cameras, communication radios. They were installing wiretaps inside the Democratic National Committee. The strangest detail, none of them acted like street criminals. They had discipline, Organization, connections. It was as if they were on an official mission, and in truth, they were. Days later, when authorities searched their belongings, they found stacks of cash, checks, and phone numbers tied to figures close to Nixon's re-election committee. The link to the president was still indirect, but already impossible to ignore. Here lies the most disturbing point. If not for that strip of tape, none of this would have come to light. The bugs would have been installed, conversations monitored, and the 1972 election could have been manipulated without anyone ever suspecting a thing. That tiny piece of tape not only exposed an operation, it cracked open a wall of secrets that could never be rebuilt. A microscopic detail functioning like a fissure in a dam. The more investigators pulled, the more pressure mounted behind the structure. And while Nixon was celebrating his crushing electoral victory, believing himself at the height of power, the gears of his downfall were already turning. Silent, unstoppable, irreversible. When the 5 men were taken into custody, nothing looked extraordinary. But as their names circulated, a chilling fact emerged. 3 had direct ties to the CIA. These weren't burglars. They were specialists, operatives trained in infiltration and intelligence gathering. Even more damning, one of the intruders carried a notebook filled with contacts, numbers belonging to political operatives, including staff linked to Nixon's re-election campaign. It was like finding an invisible signature from the White House at the crime scene. Inside the building, investigators confirmed the wiretaps weren't random. They were surgically placed on the Democrats' most strategic lines. The objective was clear. Listen in, anticipate plans, sabotage strategies, and crush opponents before they even reached the polls. And the inevitable question arose, why risk so much? Why would Nixon's team, already ahead in the polls, engage in such a reckless operation? The answer was simple, yet disturbing: fear. A fear so overwhelming that it drove the White House to act like a criminal syndicate. That fear echoed everywhere, because that strip of tape wasn't just a careless security flaw, it was the signal that the entire operation was beginning to unravel. Like a rope tugged from the wrong knot, everything was about to come undone, revealing what Nixon feared most: his secrets exposed. That tiny mistake on a summer night sparked a political storm the entire world would watch unfold, and each thread investigators pulled would drag the country deeper into the labyrinth of Watergate. In the days following the arrests at Watergate, the press began to move. At the Washington Post, 2 young reporters, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, were handed what seemed at first like just another routine crime story. But they had no idea they were about to plunge into the biggest political scandal in American history. Years later, Woodward recalled, "What looked like a simple burglary was really just the tip of an iceberg. Every phone call, every check, every name we uncovered led straight to the heart of power in Washington." A former FBI agent who chose to remain anonymous revealed, "These men were no amateurs. They had intelligence training and were tied to covert operations coming directly from within the government." Confidential documents later revealed the burglars were part of a group nicknamed the Plumbers, a team of former CIA and FBI operatives hired not to protect the nation, but to protect Nixon and attack his political enemies. Even more shocking, traces of checks used by the intruders led directly back to Nixon's committee to re-elect the president. It was like following breadcrumbs deliberately left behind. The deeper the reporters dug, the tighter the net closed. And then came one of history's most mysterious figures, an informant known only by the code name Deep Throat. He guided Woodward and Bernstein from the shadows, giving them critical leads they never could have found alone. His warning was simple: follow the money. Just follow the money. That phrase became a mantra, echoed by journalists, investigators, and even filmmakers, turning a simple piece of advice into one of the most iconic revelations in investigative journalism. But following the money meant confronting the White House directly. And the closer they got to the truth, the clearer it became. Powerful forces were willing to do anything to silence the investigation, which raised the most chilling question. How far would a government go to protect its secrets? Remember that strip of tape on the Watergate door? What seemed like a trivial detail spotted by a lone guard became a symbol of how small mistakes can topple giants, because it was that tiny detail that opened the door to an investigation capable of exposing secrets buried at the heart of the White House. And what started with a solitary night watchman soon became a race against time. Woodward and Bernstein, guided by Deep Throat's cryptic hints, uncovered documents, testimonies, and financial trails that went far beyond a burglary. Each discovery peeled back another layer of a dark labyrinth, but with each step, the pressure mounted. The government denied everything, accused the press of bias, and worked to discredit anyone daring to speak. Yet the money trail didn't lie. It became undeniable. Those spies weren't acting alone. They were protected, funded, and directed by Nixon's inner circle. And if that link could be proven, the scandal wouldn't just ruin reputations. It had the power to take down the president himself. Even Nixon's allies began to feel the weight of the revelations. As one of his top aides later testified, it was like watching a dam burst. Every exposed lie, every uncovered document made the water escape with more force, until no one could stop what was coming next. And then came the question no one dared ask publicly. Was the president himself involved? Could the President of the United States not only have known, but actively participated in crimes against his political opponents? The answer seemed unthinkable. But the secret Oval Office tapes, recordings ordered by Nixon himself, contained the words that would change everything. Words the world had not yet heard, but once revealed, would make Nixon's presidency collapse like a house of cards. Weeks turned into months, and the pressure on the White House grew unbearable. With each testimony, each revelation, Nixon's wall of silence began to crumble. But no one expected that the president's own obsession with recording everything would seal his fate. Nixon had secretly installed a recording system in the Oval Office. Every conversation, every order, every plan was captured without most people knowing. And on those tapes lay the ultimate proof. Nixon not only knew about the Watergate operation, he was actively involved in the cover-up. The nation was stunned. For the first time in American history, the most powerful figure in the country stood cornered by the truth. The president, who had won a landslide victory, was now seen as the architect of a conspiracy to sabotage democracy itself. On August 8, 1974, Richard Nixon appeared before the cameras. His voice, once steady and commanding, now heavy with defeat, announced his resignation, making him the only U.S. president to step down amid scandal. And all of it, the fall of a political empire, began with something so small, a piece of tape on a door. But Watergate didn't end with Nixon's departure. On the contrary, it opened deep wounds about just how far governments will go to hold on to power. Wounds that still echo today, in new scandals, new conspiracies, new secrets revealed. Because Watergate wasn't just the story of one man's downfall, it was a warning, a reminder that even the greatest leaders can be destroyed by the secrets they try to hide. And in the next episode, you'll discover another case that seemed impossible, but shocked the world. The Great Train Robbery, the most famous heist in England's history. A crime so bold it felt like fiction, but it was real and almost perfect.